The rotors were still turning when Lieutenant Baker realized they had put down in the wrong clearing. It was supposed to be a routine medevac extraction, 12 minutes in, 12 minutes out. But the map coordinates had led them to a patch of elephant grass barely wide enough for the skids, surrounded by triple canopy jungle so thick the sunlight came through in narrow shafts. His co-pilot, Warrant Officer Jim Hartley, was already scanning the tree line through the plexiglass, his hand resting on the collective. Behind them, the crew chief and door gunner had their M60s trained outward, fingers near the triggers. No radio chatter, no ground team waving them in. Just silence. The kind that made your skin crawl in the central highlands of Vietnam, and then they heard it, the sharp crack of an AK-47, followed by the metallic ping of a round hitting the tail boom. Baker's eyes shot to the instrument panel. No warning lights yet, but that didn't mean much. A UH-1 Huey could take a beating and keep flying, or it could drop out of the sky from a single unlucky hit to the hydraulics or fuel line. He keyed the radio. Dust off 3-2, we are taking fire. Repeat, taking fire. Grid coordinates do not match expected LZ. His voice was steady, trained, but his heart was hammering. Hartley was already pulling pitch trying to get them airborne again, but the Huey was sluggish, weighed down with a full fuel load and the weight of 2 door gunners plus their ammunition belts. The rounds were coming faster now, zipping through the grass, some of them sparking off the aluminum skin of the fuselage. The door gunner, Specialist Eddie Morales, opened up with his M60, the gun barking in short, controlled bursts. He couldn't see what he was shooting at, just muzzle flashes in the jungle shadows. The Huey shuddered as Hartley coaxed it into a hover, nose dipping forward as he tried to transition into forward flight. But something was wrong. The cyclic felt mushy, unresponsive. Baker felt it too. "We've got a hydraulic hit," Hartley said, his voice tight. Without hydraulics, the UH-1 became a beast to fly, requiring both pilots to muscle the controls just to keep it stable. Baker grabbed his side of the cyclic, adding his strength. Together, they managed to nose the aircraft forward, skimming just above the elephant grass as more rounds snapped past the canopy. The crew chief, Sergeant Ron Diaz, was on the intercom now, his voice clipped and urgent. "We're losing fuel. I can see it streaming from the belly tank." That was it. They weren't getting out of this valley without putting down again, and this time they'd have to do it right, or not at all. By the spring of 1968, the UH-1 Iroquois, universally known as the Huey, had become the most recognizable symbol of American involvement in Vietnam. More than 7,000 of these helicopters would serve in Southeast Asia over the course of the war, flying everything from troop insertions and supply runs to medevac missions and gunship support. The Huey's turbine engine and rotor system made it fast, nimble, and reliable in the punishing heat and humidity of the Vietnamese climate. But it was also thin-skinned, vulnerable to small arms fire, and notoriously difficult to fly when systems were damaged. Pilots like Baker and Hartley were trained to handle engine failures, hydraulic malfunctions, and tail rotor strikes, but no amount of training could prepare them for the chaos of a hot LZ, where everything went wrong at once. The margin for error was razor-thin, and mistakes were measured in seconds, not minutes. The problem was systemic. The UH-1, for all its versatility, was never designed to be a frontline assault aircraft. It was a utility helicopter, meant to move men and cargo quickly across rough terrain. Its aluminum airframe could be punctured by rifle-caliber rounds, and its fuel tanks, though self-sealing, could still hemorrhage under sustained fire. The hydraulic system, which powered the flight controls, ran exposed along the belly and sides of the aircraft, making it an easy target for ground fire. When hydraulics failed, the pilot had to rely on pure muscle strength to move the cyclic and collective, a task that became exponentially harder in high-stress combat situations. Between 1965 and 1973, the U.S. Army lost more than 5,000 helicopters in Vietnam, and the UH-1 accounted for the majority of those losses. For every dramatic rescue or successful insertion, there were dozens of missions that ended in forced landings, mechanical failures, or worse. Pilots quickly learned that landing in hostile territory was a gamble. Intelligence reports were often outdated or inaccurate. A clearing marked as cold free of enemy activity, could turn hot in seconds if a Viet Cong patrol happened to be moving through the area. Radio communications were unreliable in the mountains and thick jungle, meaning that pilots sometimes had to make split-second decisions without confirmation from ground troops or command. The standard operating procedure was to approach the LZ low and fast, flare hard to bleed off speed, and touch down just long enough to unload troops or pick up wounded. But when the enemy opened fire during the approach, or when mechanical problems forced an unplanned landing, those procedures went out the window. It became a test of instinct, experience, and luck. And on that particular afternoon in the Central Highlands, Baker and Hartley were running out of all three. The Huey lurched as Baker and Hartley fought the controls, the aircraft yawing slightly to the right as the damaged hydraulics struggled to respond. They were maybe 50 feet off the ground, skimming over a narrow ridgeline, when the fuel pressure gauge dropped into the red. Diaz's voice crackled over the intercom again. "We're down to fumes, sir. We've got maybe 2 minutes of flight time left." Baker scanned the terrain below. It was all wrong. Dense jungle, steep slopes, no viable landing zones. But there, maybe a quarter-mile ahead, he saw a break in the canopy, a small clearing near a stream. It wasn't ideal, but it was their only shot. "We're going in there," he said, pointing. Hartley nodded, his jaw set. They didn't have time to argue or second-guess. The Huey was already settling, the rotor RPM starting to droop as the engine struggled to maintain power with failing fuel delivery. The descent was rough. Without hydraulics, every control input required both pilots to pull or push with maximum effort, their muscles burning as they wrestled the Huey toward the clearing. Morales and Diaz were silent now, their eyes locked on the jungle below, waiting for the inevitable muzzle flashes. But none came. Either they had outdistanced the enemy patrol, or the Viet Cong were holding their fire, waiting for the Americans to land before springing an ambush. Baker didn't know which was worse. The Huey dropped below the tree line, rotors thudding in the thick air, and Baker flared hard, pulling back on the cyclic with everything he had. The nose pitched up, the tail boom dipped, and for a second it felt like the aircraft was going to flip backward. Then the skids hit the ground. Hard. The Huey bounced once, skidded sideways, and came to rest tilted at a 15-degree angle, one skid jammed against a fallen log. Baker killed the engine immediately. The rotors began to wind down, the whop-whop-whop fading into silence. For a moment, no one moved. They were down, alive, but stranded in the middle of enemy territory with a crippled helicopter and no immediate way out. Hartley was the first to speak. "Everyone okay?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Morales and Diaz checked in, both shaken but uninjured. Baker unbuckled his harness and climbed out of the cockpit, his legs unsteady. The Huey was a mess. Fuel was still dripping from the ruptured belly tank pooling in the dirt beneath the aircraft. The hydraulic lines were shredded, and there were at least a dozen bullet holes visible in the fuselage. They had been lucky, incredibly lucky, but their luck was about to run out. Diaz was already on the radio calling for extraction, but the response was not what they wanted to hear. The nearest friendly units were over 10 miles away, and air support was tied up with another operation. They were on their own, at least for the next hour. That hour would be the longest of their lives. Baker and Hartley set up a defensive perimeter, using the Huey as cover while Morales and Diaz positioned themselves on either side with the M60s. The jungle was quiet. Too quiet. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sent adrenaline spiking through their veins. They knew the enemy was out there, watching, waiting. The Viet Cong were masters of patience, experts at using the terrain to their advantage. They didn't need to rush. They could afford to wait until nightfall when the Americans would be blind and vulnerable. Baker checked his M16, making sure a round was chambered. Beside him, Hartley did the same. Neither of them said it, but they were both thinking the same thing. If the enemy decided to attack, this clearing would become their grave. The Huey, their lifeline out of the jungle, was now just a 4-ton piece of scrap metal, useless and immobile, and somewhere in the shadows, unseen eyes were watching. The UH-1 Huey was born out of necessity, In the early 1950s, the U.S. Army recognized that the Korean War had exposed critical gaps in battlefield mobility and medical evacuation. Fixed-wing aircraft were too vulnerable to ground fire, and existing helicopters were too slow and fragile to operate effectively in combat zones. Bell Helicopter won the contract to develop a new utility helicopter, and in 1959, the XH-40 prototype, which would become the UH-1, took its first flight. Powered by a Lycoming T-53 turboshaft engine, the Huey could carry up to 11 troops or 6 stretchers, cruise at 120 knots, and operate in conditions that would ground older piston-engine helicopters. By 1963, it was already being deployed to Vietnam, where it would transform the nature of modern warfare. What made the Huey revolutionary was not just its speed or payload capacity, but its versatility. It could be configured as a troop transport, a gunship, a medevac platform, or a cargo hauler, often switching roles within the same day. Its rotor system was robust enough to handle battle damage, and its turbine engine was far more reliable than the piston engines used in earlier helicopters like the H-21 Shawnee. But the Huey was not invincible. Its thin aluminum skin offered no protection against rifle-caliber bullets, and its critical systems, hydraulics, fuel lines, tail rotor drive shaft, were all exposed to ground fire. Pilots learned to fly low and fast, using terrain and speed to minimize exposure. But there was no way to eliminate the risk entirely. Between 1962 and 1975, more than 2,500 UH-1 helicopters were destroyed in Vietnam, and thousands more were damaged and returned to service. The early missions in Vietnam revealed both the Huey's strengths and its weaknesses. In 1965, during Operation Silver Bayonet in the Ia Drang Valley, UH-1s were used to insert entire battalions of U.S. troops into the heart of enemy-held territory. The helicopters allowed American commanders to achieve a level of tactical mobility that the North Vietnamese Army had never encountered before. Troops could be moved rapidly from one firefight to another, cutting off enemy retreat routes and reinforcing defensive positions in real time. But the same missions also demonstrated the Huey's vulnerability. During the Battle of Ia Drang, multiple UH-1s were shot down during landing and takeoff, and many more limped back to base with severe damage. Pilots reported that the worst moments were the final seconds before touchdown, when the helicopter was slow, low, and exposed, a perfect target for enemy gunners hidden in the jungle. By 1967, the U.S. Army had developed new tactics to reduce losses. Gunship variants of the Huey, armed with rockets and miniguns, would escort transport helicopters into hot LZs, suppressing enemy fire during insertions and extractions. The practice of combat assault became standard, multiple helicopters landing simultaneously to overwhelm enemy defenses and reduce the time any single aircraft spent on the ground. But these tactics required precise coordination, reliable intelligence, and experienced crews. When any of those elements failed, as they often did, the results could be catastrophic. A single wrong turn, a misread map, or a bad intelligence report could put a Huey and its crew directly into an enemy kill zone, where survival depended on split-second decisions and a lot of luck. Lieutenant Baker and his crew had just learned that lesson the hard way. 40 minutes had passed since the crash landing, and still no sign of rescue. The sun was lower now, casting long shadows across the clearing. Baker knew they had maybe another hour of daylight before the jungle turned pitch black. Night operations were possible, but dangerous, even for experienced pilots with night vision equipment, which their would-be rescuers might not have. He glanced at Hartley, who was scanning the tree line with a pair of binoculars. "Anything?" Baker asked. Hartley shook his head. "Nothing, but they're out there." Baker knew he was right. The Viet Cong had perfected the art of silent movement, blending into the jungle like ghosts. They could be 10 feet away or 10 yards, and the Americans wouldn't know until the shooting started. Diaz was still on the radio, trying to raise anyone who could help. Finally, a response crackled through. "Dust off 3-2. This is Falcon Lead. We have your position. ETA to your location is 20 minutes. Be advised we are coming in with gunship support. Mark your position with smoke when you hear us inbound." Baker felt a surge of relief, but it was tempered by the reality of their situation. 20 minutes was a long time when you were sitting in the open with a downed helicopter and limited ammunition. He turned to his crew. Listen up. We've got inbound rescue, but we need to hold this position until they get here. Morales, Diaz, keep your sectors covered. If they hit us, make every round count. We're not leaving this bird behind unless we have no choice. The crew nodded, their faces grim but determined. The first indication that they were not alone came 5 minutes later. Morales, who had been watching the eastern edge of the clearing, hissed a warning. Movement, 3 o'clock, about 50 meters out. Baker turned, bringing his rifle up. He couldn't see anything at first, but then he caught it. A flicker of movement, something dark shifting between the trees. It could have been an animal, but he didn't think so. The jungle had gone completely silent, the usual chorus of birds and insects replaced by an unnatural quiet. That was always a bad sign. It meant predators were nearby, and in this jungle, the most dangerous predators walked on 2 legs. Hartley whispered into the radio. Falcon Lead, be advised we have possible enemy movement in the area. Request immediate air support if available. The response was immediate. Dustoff 3-2, Cobra gunships are 5 minutes out. Hold your position and mark targets if engaged. 5 minutes. It felt like an eternity. Baker's heart was pounding now, his palms slick with sweat despite the heat. He could feel the weight of the M16 in his hands, the tension in his shoulders. Every instinct screamed at him to move, to get out of the open, but there was nowhere to go. The Huey was their only cover, and abandoning it would mean leaving behind their only hope of getting the aircraft recovered later. So they waited, eyes scanning the jungle, fingers resting lightly on triggers. And then, just as the tension became unbearable, they heard it, the distant thump of rotor blades growing louder by the second. The Cobras were coming. The UH-1 Cobra gunship was everything the UH-1 was not. Where the Huey was broad and utilitarian, the Cobra was sleek and deadly, a purpose-built attack helicopter designed to hunt and destroy ground targets. Armed with a 20mm nose-mounted cannon, 2.75-inch rocket pods, and TOW anti-tank missiles, the Cobra could deliver devastating firepower with surgical precision. Its tandem seating configuration reduced its frontal profile, making it a harder target, and its advanced targeting systems allowed pilots to engage enemies from greater distances. When 2 Cobras appeared over the ridgeline, their rotor wash flattening the grass at the edge of the clearing, Baker felt a wave of relief wash over him. They were no longer alone. The cavalry had arrived. The lead Cobra pilot's voice came through on the radio, calm and professional. Dustoff 3-2, this is Cobra 1-6, we've got you in sight. Sit tight, we're going to do a gun run along the tree line to discourage any uninvited guests. Mark your position with smoke so we don't accidentally ventilate you. Diaz popped a purple smoke grenade and tossed it a few meters away from the Huey. Thick violet smoke billowed up, clearly marking their position. The Cobras banked sharply, descending toward the jungle's edge with their nose cannons already spooling up. Then, in a display of controlled violence, they opened fire. The 20mm rounds chewed through the foliage, sending wood splinters and leaves exploding into the air. The noise was deafening, a sustained roar that echoed across the valley. If there were enemy troops in that tree line, they were either dead or running for their lives. Moments later, the rescue Huey appeared, escorted by the remaining Cobra. It was a UH-1H, the same model as Baker's downed bird, but this one was airworthy and fast. The pilot brought it in low, flaring hard just before the skids touched down. The crew chief was already waving Baker and his team forward. There was no time for inspections or farewells to their crippled aircraft. Baker, Hartley, Morales, and Diaz grabbed their gear and sprinted toward the rescue bird, heads down against the rotor wash. They piled into the cargo bay, and the Huey was lifting off before they even had time to buckle in. Below them, their Huey sat abandoned in the clearing, surrounded by purple smoke and the wreckage of their near disaster. It would be recovered later, stripped for parts, repaired, and returned to the fight. But for now, it was just a reminder of how quickly everything could go wrong in Vietnam. As the rescue Huey banked away from the clearing and climbed toward safer airspace, Baker sat in the cargo bay with his head in his hands, the adrenaline finally draining from his system. His hands were shaking, his heart still racing. Hartley sat beside him, silent, staring out the open door at the jungle rushing past below. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing to say. They had survived, but it had been close. Too close. In the seat across from them, Morales was grinning, relief written all over his face. "Damn, sir," he said, his voice hoarse. "I thought we were done for back there." Baker managed a weak smile. "Yeah, me too." Diaz, ever the pragmatist, was already on the radio, coordinating the recovery mission for their downed Huey. Life in Vietnam didn't stop, even after a near-death experience. There were always more missions, more risks, more chances for things to go catastrophically wrong. Back at the base, they were debriefed by their commanding officer, a grizzled major who had seen it all before. He listened to their account of the mission, nodding occasionally, his expression unreadable. When Baker finished, the major leaned back in his chair and sighed. "You got lucky," he said flatly. "Wrong coordinates, mechanical failure, enemy contact, and you still made it out. That doesn't happen often." He paused, then added, "Your bird will be recovered tomorrow. Assuming Charlie doesn't blow it up overnight, we'll have it back in the air within a week." Baker nodded, but he wasn't thinking about the helicopter. He was thinking about how easily it could have gone the other way. How many other crews hadn't been as lucky? How many Hueys were still out there, scattered across the jungle, their crews missing or dead? The statistics told the story. By the end of the Vietnam War, the U.S. military had lost more than 12,000 helicopters of all types, with the UH-1 accounting for nearly half of those losses. Some were shot down in combat, others were lost to mechanical failures, and still others were destroyed in accidents during the chaotic conditions of jungle warfare. The average lifespan of a helicopter in Vietnam was measured in months, not years, and the average pilot faced a constant calculus of risk every time they lifted off. Yet despite the losses, the Huey proved its worth again and again. It saved tens of thousands of lives through medevac missions, delivered crucial supplies to isolated outposts, and provided the mobility that allowed American forces to project power across the rugged Vietnamese terrain. It was a tool of war, but it was also a lifeline, the sound of salvation for wounded soldiers who knew that if they could just hold on a little longer, the Huey would come for them. For pilots like Baker and Hartley, the experience of being shot down and rescued was a rite of passage, a reminder of the razor-thin margin between success and catastrophe. They would fly again the next day, and the day after that, because that was the job. But they would never forget the feeling of sitting in that clearing, surrounded by jungle and uncertainty, waiting for rescue and hoping that their luck would hold just a little bit longer. It was a feeling shared by thousands of helicopter crews who served in Vietnam, and it left a mark that never fully healed. The war would end, the helicopters would be retired, and the veterans would go home, but the memories would remain, vivid, unshakable, and forever intertwined with the sound of rotor blades cutting through humid air. The legacy of the UH-1 Huey extends far beyond the battlefields of Vietnam. After the war, the helicopter remained in service with the U.S. military and allied nations for decades, adapting to new roles and conflicts. In the 1980s and 1990s, Hueys were used in counter-narcotics operations in Central and South America, in peacekeeping missions in the Balkans, and in disaster relief operations around the world. The design was so successful that variants of the UH-1 are still in production today, with modern versions featuring upgraded avionics, more powerful engines, and improved survivability features. Countries from Japan to Italy to Taiwan continue to operate Huey variants, a testament to the aircraft's enduring utility and reliability. But for those who flew it in Vietnam, the Huey will always be more than just a machine. It was a symbol of hope for soldiers under fire, a lifeline for the wounded, and a constant companion in the daily grind of combat operations. Veterans speak of the Huey with a mixture of affection and respect, acknowledging its flaws while celebrating its achievements. It wasn't perfect, one former pilot recalled years later. The hydraulics were a pain, the armor was basically non-existent, and every flight felt like tempting fate. But when you needed it most, when everything else had gone to hell, the Huey got you where you needed to go. And more often than not, it brought you back home. That sentiment, repeated in countless interviews and memoirs, captures the essence of the UH-1's place in military history, not as an invincible war machine, but as a reliable partner in the most difficult and dangerous work imaginable. The lessons learned from the Huey's service in Vietnam shaped the development of future military helicopters. The vulnerabilities exposed by combat operations led to significant improvements in armor protection, redundant systems, and crash-resistant fuel tanks in later designs like the UH-60 Blackhawk and the AH-64 Apache. The doctrine of air mobility, pioneered with the UH-1, became a cornerstone of modern military strategy, influencing operations from the Gulf War to Afghanistan. The Huey proved that helicopters could be far more than glorified observation platforms. They could be the backbone of an entire tactical system, reshaping the battlefield in ways that fixed-wing aircraft never could. That legacy, born in the jungles of Southeast Asia, continues to define how militaries around the world think about mobility, firepower, and rapid response. Today, more than 50 years after the end of the Vietnam War, a handful of UH-1 Hueys remain in service with U.S. forces, primarily with the Air Force's missile security teams and the Marine Corps' training units. Hundreds more are preserved in museums, their once pristine paint now faded, their rotor blades still, their engines silent. Visitors walk past them, reading plaques that describe missions and statistics, but the numbers can never capture the full story. They can't convey the terror of a hot LZ, the relief of a successful medevac, or the exhaustion of flying 15-hour days in 100-degree heat. They can't describe the bond between crew members who trusted each other with their lives, or the weight of knowing that every mission could be your last. For the veterans who flew them, the sound of a Huey is unmistakable and unforgettable. Even decades later, the distinctive whop 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 of the rotor blades can trigger memories both painful and profound. Some veterans seek out air shows and museums just to hear that sound again, to feel the vibration in their chests and remember what it was like to be young and scared and alive in ways they never would be again. Others avoid it entirely, the memories too raw, the cost too high. But whether they embrace it or avoid it, the Huey remains a central part of their identity, a thread connecting them to a war that defined a generation, and a helicopter that became synonymous with courage, sacrifice, and survival against impossible odds. Lieutenant Baker retired from the Army in 1975, shortly after the fall of Saigon. He never flew a helicopter again. Warrant Officer Hartley stayed in, eventually transitioning to the UH-60 Blackhawk and serving through the first Gulf War before retiring as a Chief Warrant Officer 4. Specialist Morales left the service after his tour in Vietnam and became a high school teacher in California, rarely speaking about his time in the war. Sergeant Diaz remained in the Army for 20 years, serving as a crew chief instructor and passing on the lessons he had learned to a new generation of helicopter crews. All of them carried the memory of that afternoon in the Central Highlands, when everything went wrong and they still made it out alive. It was a story they told rarely and only to those who would understand, other veterans who had been there, who had felt the same fear and the same relief, who knew what it meant to trust your life to a machine made of aluminum and rivets and hope. The UH-1 Huey was never meant to be a symbol. It was designed as a workhorse, a practical solution to a tactical problem. But in the crucible of Vietnam, it became something more, a testament to human ingenuity, resilience, and the will to survive. It carried men into battle and brought them home. It saved lives and took lives. It was both a tool of war and a symbol of hope. And for those who flew it, fought in it, or waited desperately to hear its approach, it will always be the sound of salvation, the beating heart of a war that demanded everything and gave back only memories and scars. The Huey is gone from active frontline service now, replaced by newer, faster, more capable machines. But its legacy endures not in museums or history books, but in the hearts and minds of those who knew it best. The pilots, crew chiefs, gunners, and medics who staked their lives on its ability to fly one more mission, to take one more hit, to bring them home one more time. And so in the silence that comes after, we remember, not with fanfare or glory, but with quiet respect for those who flew through the fire and lived to tell the story. For those who didn't make it back, for the machines that carried them imperfect and vulnerable, yet somehow equal to the impossible task asked of them. The UH-1 Huey flew its last combat mission decades ago, but its rotor blades still turn in the memories of those who were there, a sound that will never fade. A reminder that in the darkest moments when everything goes wrong, courage and skill, and a little bit of luck can still bring you home. If you found this story compelling, please consider subscribing to our channel and watching more documentaries about the brave men and women who served in Vietnam and the incredible machines they flew. Their stories deserve to be remembered, and we're committed to bringing you more in-depth, historically accurate content that honors their service and sacrifice. Hit that like button, share this video with anyone who appreciates military history, and let us know in the comments what aircraft or mission you'd like us to cover next. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.
In the Vietnam War, the sky was not a safe place. Every mission was a gamble between coming back or vanishing.